Hello, everybody, and welcome along to today's episode of the Event Industry News podcast. My name is James Dixon, wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you are tuning into today's podcast from. And joining us on today's podcast is Paul Campbell. Paul is the CEO and co-founder of Tito. I suppose in a simplest way, we could say that you are an event management software company, Paul, but we will no doubt find out more about you as today's episode progresses. First of all, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
It's a pleasure, and thanks, James, for having me on here. It's great to be here.
Excellent. And Paul joins us from Tito's base in Dublin, in the Republic of Ireland. Hopefully it's as sunny there today as it is as over this side of the Irish Sea.
It's absolutely beautiful. Yeah, global warming to thank or to hate or to be worried about, but it is. The sun is splitting the trees, as they say here.
Excellent. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was I right or wrong in saying that fundamentally what you guys do is event management software, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, event ticket sales software, and then the management of the sales after that. Yeah.
Okay. So ticket sales primarily, is that where the platform was born?
Exactly, yeah. We wanted to build the best checkout experience for buying tickets on the internet. And that was basically what the initial goal was to do.
That's a bold goal to have to set out.
Yeah, and I mean, it's quite confined as well, though. I mean, the fundamental problem that I had when I set out to build something was that I was going to a lot of events, and I found that the registration or the ticket purchasing or getting experience could be stressful at the best of times, or you were landed with a ton of fields to fill in before you could even get your ticket, and it always felt a bit more stressful than it ought to. And I said there should be a better way, and people ought to be able to get access to a better way. So that was the premise behind building the first version.
And when it came to building that first version, was it something that you were able to do? Does your background lie in programming and developing this type of technology?
Yeah, so I was building software for customers and clients all over the world for a couple of years before starting Tito. And one of the previous clients they were selling things online, so we had written some code to integrate PayPal. And I decided that for the very first event on Tito, I would just create a little tiny app that connected PayPal to our website so that you could basically click buy, pay on PayPal, and then come back and you had tickets. Nothing else. That's all it was.
And one thing that instantly sort of aroused my curiosity when I was on your website, in fact, there are several key bits of text that are on there which I liked, but one that said that you've steered clear of the startup mania, but you're okay with that. And just from my own personal point of view, I've interviewed on this podcast a lot of tech startups. Professionally, I've met a lot of tech startups and companies who may have launched new products and services that they think will be the next big thing. And a lot of companies do like to make a big hoo-ha about themselves, a big sort of media splash and push it out there. Have you guys then taken a completely different tact in terms of how you wanted to grow and develop the product?
I think it's safe to say we have, yeah. The startup mania thing, it's probably a bit too broad because you can't really tar everyone with the same brush. But in my mind, the startup moniker is associated with hypergrowth, or VC-backed companies. If you can't grow fast enough to make the investors' money back at all costs, well, then the company dies. And in my mind, there's an association between that kind of focus on growth at all costs and maybe sometimes compromising one's moral values or principles in the pursuit of that growth. And that was something that my co-founder, Doc, and I set out to try to avoid from the outset, that we would want to try and do things ethically. And as we thought that we would want to be advertised to, or we tried to build a software and the business that we would want to be to be part of, I guess, or to be customers of. And that was to avoid things like spammy email tactics or anything that used kind of trickery or dark patterns or weird psychological hooks to get people to do things. We just didn't want any of that. We wanted to keep things simple and really focus on being a platform that kind of had integrity at its core.
And I suppose in doing that and taking that approach, not that there's anything wrong with the other route, and people who have a
Right.
startup who decide to go down the VC route and to source financial backing, but inevitably with that route comes a certain element of pressure and perhaps compromise that people may have to agree to in order to take one alongside the other. And by the sounds of things, doing it your route, it means that you're not maybe as subjected to the levels of compromise that the other route would perhaps lead you towards.
Right. And there is another compromise. The compromise is that our growth is a lot slower. We don't have access to shocking amounts of capital to be able to move quickly if we need to. But on the flip side, things are a lot more calm. We feel in control. We're able to kind of regulate. We're able to respond to things. We're able to think about what we're doing as we do it. Because everything is slow, we've got time to breathe, and we've got time to take into consideration whether what we're doing is the right thing for the company, and that what we do resonates with the values that we set out. And interestingly, the values were kind of always there, and we always knew what they were, but we've been working together for 5-6 years now, but it's only recently that we've started articulating those values in terms of words and practices that we can actually refer to. So it's been an interesting exercise to tease that out, because we knew that the values were in us, because we always aligned with how we wanted to do things. But like integrity, I think, is very much fundamental, and that was one of the words that we chose, that we don't want to sacrifice on integrity. And I think that that's one of the things that is the first to grow. If you've got growth at all costs in the back of your mind, the ethics of it sort of come into question.
Well, not only that, but the actual the operational aspects and the usability of whatever it is that you're delivering can often be affected as well. And again, just referencing things that I've experienced firsthand, and that are new, tech startups that have brought products to market, that have launched quickly with a big fanfare, but whose products unfortunately don't work as they should do.
Right.
And that time to breathe that you talk about here, time to breathe is time to test, time to refine, time to make sure that things are actually working and correct before you put them out there. Because there's nothing worse than putting a product out there and then having to withdraw it or refine it or change it or test it or update it.
Absolutely. And James, thank you, because that gives me a perfect chance to segue into another of the core principles of what we're trying to do, which is, I mean, integrity is great, and a lot of people can speak to having integrity, but what you're talking about there in the terms that we're coming to realize is excellence. And that's what our second pillar of how we're thinking about running the businesses is that we want to do things well, in terms of like ethically good, but we also want to do things well in terms of a great user experience, a considered product, a product that really kind of considers its users' needs as an organizer. Like, if the fundamental problem that any software ought to be solving is, can I make the person using the software better at what they do? And that's kind of that's kind of our motivating factor. First of all, is what we're doing good? And second of all, is it good for our customer?
And of course, the difficulty in what you guys do and the entire tech industry that develops things that ultimately are going to receive interaction from consumers is that consumers themselves can't necessarily articulate what they find good and bad about these types of platform. Everyone is very used nowadays to going onto a laptop, onto a tablet, onto a smartphone and purchasing a ticket or buying something online. Irrespective of how well they can articulate that, though, what they can do is suddenly say, oh, that was easy, or oh, that was a bit of a ball ache.
Yeah, and
it's those sort of reactions that you're trying to work within.
Absolutely. And the thing is, there's a lot of emphasis within kind of like the startup literature world on metrics, measure everything, do what works and ditch what doesn't. But one of my principles is that just because something works doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And when you were mentioning those kind of things, I was reminded of like going on a website and just typing in a box, and then an overlay pops up, whether it's asking for my email or trying to distract my attention toward an app. Tito just simply doesn't have any of that stuff, and there's no way to get pop-ups that distract your attention away from what you're doing. But those things work. People do fill in their email address primarily because they're usually designed in such a way that you can't find the close button and you end up putting your email address in just to get rid of the damn thing.
Mm.
So employing things because they work or because they drive metrics is a tool as far as I'm concerned, but it should not be the sole purpose for making decisions when it comes to building software that people use and people ought to love.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when it just sort of referencing that testing and that sort of breathing space that you guys seem to have wanted to afford yourselves from day one. When it came to the research, the development, the programming side of things, there is obviously then an almost a paradox there that in order to actually get it right, it has to be tested somehow. How do you go through that whole testing process when you want to maintain the values that you set out from day one?
So I think part of that is about building a community. So we have put a lot of effort into getting to know our customers really well, and down through the years, traditionally that has been either going to conferences and finding organizers and getting to know them and hanging out and asking them to use the software. All the way up to last year, we ran our own conference specifically for organizers. And we think of these people as insiders. And we're always very happy to accommodate the needs of our insiders over and above what our core product provides. So we have our core platform that has been solid and stable for about 3 to 4 years. It was even solid before we incorporated as a company. That's kind of how much we cared about getting it right before we even incorporated the business. And what we do is we have about 50 features that not everybody on Tito gets, that are all at various points of finishedness, but they already provide value to a lot of customers. These are things like Salesforce integration, which we don't advertise, but some of our biggest customers use. Things like being able to pay by invoice rather than credit card, all the way down to tiny little things like sending certain metadata to a payment provider that isn't enabled by default. And it's a relationship with these insiders that, one, we've seen value in, and now we want to, as we grow, we want to formalize and improve on, because we really appreciate that feedback loop. And then that kind of strikes on the third principle that builds on the core of integrity and then the commitment to excellence, which is really we're here. We want to bring delight to our customers. Not delight in and of itself, not just whimsy. We don't want to create a lovely UI that's all colors and smiles and jokes, because that doesn't mean much without that really commitment to excellence and quality in the center. And then below that, making sure that what we're doing is good in terms of moral good. But ultimately what we're trying to do is bring like fulfillment and delight to our customers' lives, and then hopefully to their customers too, because obviously being sort of a B2B style business, our customers have thousands and actually millions of customers then. So
indeed, yeah. And as I said, going back to what I said, the biggest compliment I suppose that a customer could pay a platform like this is having completed the process. Just that simple act of going, oh, that was easy. I suppose that's ultimately what all of the tech companies are striving for. One thing that I wanted to ask you is that there's to me there is a fundamental difference between event registration and ticket purchasing. The two can be very, very, and often are very, very different things. If you take the example of registering for your Common or Garden trade show as a delegate, is a very different format to actually buying a ticket to go and see a concert. Does your platform recognize that, and are the two processes fundamentally different, or is there a shared core of what happens in that process, whether it be a registration for an event or a ticket purchase?
It's a really interesting point. So I guess if event registration is the kind of thing that's associated with the stress that I was talking about earlier, although buying concert tickets has its own kind of stress and UI issue, but we never really got into the concert ticket buying problem. And it is something that we have thought about tackling and maybe we'll do, but no, I am definitely talking about event registration. But what I took out of the ticket purchasing experience, as in ticket purchasing, is that in the Tito checkout, the purchase is the primary action. So you
Yeah.
choose your tickets and you buy them. Now you have them. All right. So if I've bought a ticket for myself and I've bought a ticket for you, I just I put in my own name, I put in my own credit card details, and then I fill in my own details, my own T-shirt size, my own whatever data the event organizer wants to collect off me. I fill that in, I press save, and I've got my ticket, and I can add it to my phone or whatever. But then I can go to the next ticket, and I can type in James Dixon, throw in your email address, and then say, I don't have James's info, but send him the ticket. So what we've done is separated the purchase from the data collection part of the registration. And sometimes new customers who are familiar with the just get all of the marketing info up front and then let them pay. Sometimes people are confused by that and maybe aren't used to it. And we always have to go back and explain that we want to take the stress out of your customers' purchase experience. And then we want to make sure that all the data that we get is from the person who owns the data. And this kind of factors into so many things. Like, one, it's much less stressful for the person purchasing because they're not answering questions that they don't know the answer to, or they're not answering questions just to fill in a data validation.
Yeah.
And then second, for things like data privacy laws, the big thing was last year was GDPR. It means that the flow of data is always from the person who's providing the data. And it means that we can get opt-in from the individual rather than the person who's purchasing on their own behalf. So that's the way the Tito registration has been: purchase first and then details later since the start. And it's not something that we've really been prepared to compromise on because we think it works for those reasons.
Sure, and I dare say that there would be a subconscious reaction to that people, users may not be aware of instantly, but certainly if you were to spell it out to somebody, we've all been in that scenario where we want to complete a transaction, a purchase, whatever it may be, and you have to go through the rigmarole of putting in all your details first of all. And everybody knows why they're putting in their details.
Right.
They know that, oh, right, they're not going to let me finish doing what I'm doing until I've given them every last detail of my life so that they can then market a load of stuff to me. People may not know that instantly, but if you would spell it out, they get it. By flipping it on its head and doing it the other way, it might only seem like a subtle change, but you are suddenly approaching things subconsciously totally different to the users. It's almost like the guard is down. Yes, no problem. Have my information because you've let me do what I wanted to do first of all.
Yeah, and it's just a fundamentally having respect for all of the people in the chain. Like, we consider, like, the person potentially doing the marketing is our customer. So we want to make sure that we do provide access to the data and the ability to collect the data. But we're saying that we actually value the experience of the person processing the checkout as well, because we're building that and we're responsible for it. And that's why it should be appealing to become a Tito customer, because we care about that so much. And so we care very much about the experience of the person buying the ticket as well as our direct customer, which is the organizer.
Well, we've spoken at sort of relative length so far about the registration process and how you guys have developed your own thinking behind how that should work. Born out of that, you mentioned at the very beginning of the episode is the event management side of things and the tools that help from an event management. Again, what has been your sort of philosophy to developing those side of things? Because in a similar way, I've seen companies who developed that out of another system because they feel that it's a critical add-on that they must be able to offer to the industry, but have done it too quickly and not really addressed what people want.
Yeah, very experimentally would probably be the short answer. Slightly longer is, I kind of see it as a life cycle arc. So when you first think of an event, you want to gather interest. And then when your tickets go on sale, you want to take registrations, and then maybe you want to send a survey before the event, or obviously collect data beforehand. During the event, then you've got certain concerns. You need on-site check-in and all that. And then afterwards, maybe there's more data collection and follow-up or integration with CRMs. In terms of our public activity, we've kept the focus very much on the checkout piece and then just managing the attendee data. But the philosophy, as you asked, is to try to build the simplest thing that works. Somewhat Occam's razor, no simpler, but the simplest thing that works, and then if that tool doesn't work for certain customers, make it really easy to get data out of Tito.
Right.
So we're not quite there yet, but you've always been able to get data really easily out in CSV exports or whatever. And we launched just at Christmas a really extensive API for a first API release. We've been tipping along at implementing our API for a couple of years, but we launched a really, really big release in December. And we're not shouting about that just yet, but it really makes it very, very easy to get access to all your data in Tito. So those are the two parts of the philosophy. And then we've just been building the tools that we feel we would need as organizers. So it seems very obvious that you should be able to send an email to your attendees. And so we built our messages tool. Then it's obvious that you need to be able to manage waiting lists. You need to be able to offer RSVPs. And we've built various versions of these tools, but they're all still in beta. So this goes back to what you were saying at the start, that we really, really like things to be, first of all, well tested, 2, stable, and 3, delightful before we actually say this thing's ready to go. So we still have our messages tool. We've had it for 5 or 6 years, and we still call it beta, I think, because there are still ways that it's not quite delightful enough for us to say this is ready. But those are some of the tools that we've built. But that's the philosophy: is build the simplest thing that works, and if you need to get your data out, make it really easy to get it out.
Now, having said everything that you said about almost going under the radar in a way, but making sure that the focus is always on the usability of the product itself, that it works effectively, and not maybe making the big sort of song and dance startup noises that we've become accustomed to. When you go onto your website, there's a map of the world on there with pins dropped in various locations that you've worked in. And you've processed over $300 million or euros worth of tickets in over 2,500 cities. So there's still a significant growth that you've had there. How have you been able to develop that type of growth and deliver the solutions in that number of cities without necessarily the sort of the shouting and the song and dance making?
Yeah, it is quite vindicating. Like, one of the goals as part of our integrity is to try to achieve growth without compromising on our values. And one thing we haven't done is send a broadcast email to our 15,000 registered users, which is sort of shameful in one way, but also quite fulfilling in the other. But for the first couple of years, it was all word of mouth. And we were in a privileged position that our own personal acquaintances, I guess, through going to conferences and traveling all over the world, it led to us becoming friends with people who organized very influential conferences.
Right.
And we found that if JSConf was a Tito customer, then JSConf Argentina, Brazil, Asia, Paris, London, all of there's like a mushroom effect.
Sure.
And that was a really interesting observation, and that still happens. So as the JavaScript world expands, it expands into other frameworks, and other frameworks look to the conferences that came before them, and that organic effect is still going. Sure. And then after that, it became just a simple business, sales, and marketing exercise. We hired. Our fourth hire was in sales, and it was really a matter of sending a lot of emails, working the phones, that kind of thing. Really just doing a lot of outreach, again, continuing to go to conferences, meeting people, asking for referrals, just the hard graft of attracting new customers to a business.
But I suppose, again, going back to something that we said earlier, if fundamentally what you've got is a product that you hope at the end of the process somebody goes, wow, that was easy, that instantly is going to prompt recommendations, isn't it? Because if somebody that they're working with, an industry peer, says, I need a registration tool for my thing next, have you worked with anything recently? Oh yeah, it was easy. That's all they really have to hear, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's the end goal that's kind of like the gold standard of what we want to achieve. We want to get there where people are they use Tito and their jaw drops, and it's that holy shit moment of we have to have this at all costs. And that's what we're working towards, and that's kind of the North Star, as it were. And in some ways we're headed there, and in some ways we need to do better, but we're always trying to improve.
Sure. And in terms of future visions and long-term aspirations, again, something that I've seen a number of technology companies do is enter the market offering one particular specific type of product or service, and then expand into offering this and that and that. And oh, by the way, we now also do that. It's right for some people, it's not right for others. What are your own intentions with Tito in terms of where you see the business expanding and developing, and avenues that you think you might be able to explore?
Yeah, I'm particularly inspired by platform style companies, which is we need to fit it into how we do business because we're not a platform business. But I like the idea of looking at a product as infrastructure, and that kind of helps you make decisions on what should be next. Like, is this tool a nice to have that could be better served with third-party software, or is it part of the infrastructure of running an event? And typically, if it's part of the infrastructure of running an event, then it's attractive for me to build into the core Tito platform.
Sure. We've been talking on today's podcast to Paul Campbell. Paul is the CEO and co-founder of Tito, and talking really about their philosophy and their approach to the products that they designed and programmed and brought to market that are allowing the event registration process to become, I suppose, smoother and more easy to actually handle and deal with. It would be a fair way of summing it up. Paul, if people want to find out a little bit more about Tito and get in touch with you guys directly to speak to you, what are the easiest ways that they can go about that?
You can find us on the web. It's very easy to find us. Just a search for Tito. You should end up on ti.to, a nice, easy to remember domain. And you can get in touch with us, hello@tito.io.
Fantastic. Paul Campbell from Tito, thanks very much for joining us today. If you're watching the video version of today's podcast via eventindustrynews.com, don't forget to head over to your favorite podcast provider. You can listen to and download all of the previous episodes as audio versions to listen to on your commute to and from work. And as a flip to that, if you're listening to the audio version and you want to hop over to eventindustrynews.com, you'll find all of the latest news within the industry, all of the latest features that we've been publishing, as well as video versions of all the podcasts. But for now, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Our thanks once again to Paul Campbell from Tito for joining us from Dublin in the Republic of Ireland today, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Event Industry News podcast. Thanks very much and goodbye.